The president of the Association of Bureau de Change Operators of Nigeria, Aminu Gwadebe, in a statement with Nairametrics, hinted that over 91% of the Forex liquidity is outside the system. He called for a cohesive strategy between the Central Bank of Nigeria and the BDC operators to tap into this opportunity. The licensed currency traders said that apart from collaborating with the Apex Bank, they are always ready to share skills and techniques to make the retail end of the Forex market better. Meanwhile, the Center for Fiscal Transparency and Public Integrity has called on the CBN to come clean on who controls the BDCs and clamp down on the banks that enable round-tripping as means of restoring confidence in the Naira. To provide more insights and respond to matters arising, we have the president of ABCON himself in person of Aminu Gwadebe, and to balance out the conversation and provide more perspective, we have research and insight lead Norrenberger Financial Group, Samuel Oyekanmi. Good morning, gentlemen. All right, Samuel, it's great to have you in. It's great to have you in. Let's begin. We know that the Naira, in spite of all the interventions from the CBN, has been underperforming, and obviously we've seen the floating of the Naira and so many other interventions, and a weaker dollar even this year. But the Naira seems to still just be stable. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, quite interesting intricate relationship when it comes to the exchange rate in Nigeria. And yes, as you have also alluded, the CBN has come up with quite a number of reforms really to be able to, first of all, bridge the gap between the parallel market and the official market. And I think we enjoyed that for a while. In recent time, we've already seen the divergence again come to play. And it just speaks to the environment around the FX market in Nigeria. So first, what are the major sources of FX inflows into Nigeria? We've seen improved diaspora remittances here. But in terms of major export factor, which is crude oil, there's been volatility around crude oil prices. We've also been unable to meet our quota in terms of production. And those have had some level of impact in terms of inflows of FX into the economy. And then we also have issues around the level of transparency. And yes, of course, the CBN has been able to manage that to an extent, but there still needs to be a lot more that needs to be done around the management of the IMTOs, BDCs, and then the banks in the autonomous windows. I think if we're able to have some form of synergy across that, we might begin to see many of these policies and reforms play out as we would desire.
Mm-hmm. Right, and obviously we've also seen the BDC operators chime in on this matter. The president of ABCON himself highlighted that 91% of FX liquidity is outside of the system. How would you say this is fueling what we're witnessing in the FX markets?
Yeah, so just like the BDC mentioned, right, as you look at the money supply, for example, in Nigeria, you see that the region of 90 to 91% of currencies in circulation is also outside of the system, and you would also find that to play out also in the FX market. So you have a situation whereby about 20 billion-ish comes in as diaspora remittances. Only about 25% of that comes through the IMTOs. And a huge chunk of that is in the hands of people. And it also speaks to also the sense around Nigeria, the level of trust or the racketeering or the round-tripping sensibility that is in the Nigerian FX market. Yes, a huge of those funds do not find their ways around the official channel, which is through the CBN and then the banks. A lot of them go through BDCs, and then allegations of if IMTOs are also cornering some of those funds towards some other needs. Of course, we don't have proof around that, but there's been allegations around that. And I know the CBN has also come up with regulations and circulars to banks and IMTOs to be able to cover that. But a huge form of those funds are in the hands of individuals, BDCs, parallel market traders, or roadside FX peddlers. And I think to a large extent that has also impacted the discrepancy which we are beginning to see between the official rate and the parallel market rate. There needs to be a system whereby we can, in real time, see what BDCs or FX traders on the road who normally you expect them to be able to ensure that FX get into the hands of Nigerians on the street. But of course, in recent times, what we've seen is that they actually trade huge volumes, even more than the likes of international money transfer operators would do, and that's a huge. It means that they have very high pricing power. So there's need for the CBN to find a way to regulate activities in that area of the market, so that we can begin to see some level of transparency in terms of pricing, demand, and then supply. Maybe by then we'll start seeing some positives in terms of FX movement.
You know, the BDCs, you're saying the CBN needs to clamp down on them some more. They have done so in several ways with the recapitalization and, you know, other means. But we have the BDCs operators themselves coming out to say there's need for collaboration between the BDCs and the CBN, that, you know, they can bring their technical skills to the table. How do you imagine a partnership with the CBN and the BDCs, you know, panning out, and what would be the relationship? What would the BDCs be bringing to the table to aid the CBN in its efforts to boost the Naira?
So ideally, right, BDCs are meant to be able to ensure that it's just like having microfinance banks in the banking sector, right? You want to be able to ensure that FX gets to the hands of small traders who are in need of FX. Unfortunately, or as the Nigerian economy would have, or Nigerian system would see, is that BDCs are now transacting in high volumes, even more than what you see from the pretty much structured environment. And just like you also said, the CBN has also done quite a lot to be able to either regulate the BDCs or clamp down, as you'd say. I remember in the days of Emefiele, we used to have EFCCs running around FX traders across some regions of Nigeria. So yes, if there's going to be some level of, there is need for that collaboration, but there is, first of all, a huge need for that oversight, right? There is to some extent now, but to what extent we really do not know. I know that the BDCs are they're really calling for the CBN to allow them access into the FX window. While I don't think it's a bad idea, but there is really need to have house cleaning. So remember, there was a time the CBN released disclosure circular showing the number of BDC players that we have in Nigeria. It's really ridiculous. And of course, the recapitalization is meant to clean that up, but there is still need to be done. What's the framework? What's the system? Or what's the mechanism behind the pricing of FX in the BDC market? There's really nothing that suggests an idea of the level of demand and supply that we have in there. So we need to have a system where first there is real-time data, right? Real-time data on the demand, the supply of FX in the BDC market, which then informs pricing. But unfortunately, what we see in recent times is that you look at the official market, you're seeing 1,545, 1,550. Then for no reason or for some perceived high demand, FX in the BDC market just hits around 1,600, and there is really no data-driven explanation for those discrepancies. So we need first that oversight. Then we can now talk about the level of collaboration that you want to have between BDCs and then the CBN. Of course, they also have their own technical expertise in terms of understanding of the markets at the lowest level. So then they can bring that in. But first, this regulation is quite important, and there needs to be a system in place to also measure and track that.
We see that level of regulation. Finally, we have the Center for Fiscal Transparency and Public Integrity. They are calling on the CBN to come clean on who controls the BDCs and clamp down on the banks as well to enable to stop round tripping. What are your thoughts on this? What's going to come out of this? You know, there's an allegation somewhere in there. What are your thoughts, Samuel?
Yeah, of course, there's been allegation for the longest time that BDCs are one of the drivers of FX, either discrepancy or depreciation. And whether true or not, we just need to look at it from what we are saying is that gap is widening. We don't have the data. So of course the CBN really needs to, and it pretty much just accentuates what I just said, that level of regulation really needs to brought into play. I remember last year the CBN came up with some regulatory supervisory framework for the BDC operations in Nigeria, which also ensures that they disclose their ownership structure, disclose their capitalization and whatnot. I think that's a step in the right direction, but there really needs to be a lot more, because beyond that, there's been not so much conversation, except for about 2 weeks ago when the conversation around if BDCs, like they're going to be extending the capitalization for BDCs and whatnot, is going to come to play in this month of June. So we really need to see that happening more. The CBN really needs to be more direct in their approach to the BDC, because at the end of the day, your mandate is to ensure price stability, and FX is a very huge part of that. The BDC are a major player in Nigeria. They would probably account for about 70 to 80% of the trading, FX trading in the Nigerian economy. So that means that they are a huge stakeholder. So you need to be able to manage what you're doing in terms of who controls who are the promoters, what's their capital base like, what is the demand like, what's the supply like. There are estimations around profits that they make around the BDC, but of course there is really no verifiable data around what BDCs are doing. Now we really need to start seeing that so that decisions going forward can be based on those data.
Regulation, but there are also calls for legislation, right? The legal angle of this to regulate the FX market. What would legislation look like within that market? Did you see that being possible, and what sort of legislation?
Yeah, so like I said, we saw one last year. That was the regulatory and supervisory guidelines for BDC operations in Nigeria. And it was quite detailed, over 50 pages, quite a number of directives to BDC operations and things that would, of course, be like frameworks for how operations are going to be done going forward. And I think that's one of the steps in the right direction. But of course, back again to having a system in place. So what you have in neighboring countries, for example, like Ghana, who has an FX Peru, for example, where a huge part of their FX transactions are done by banks. Even the BDC operations, whatever they do is being facilitated by the banks. It helps the Bank of Ghana to be able to have huge oversight on what is happening in the FX market. You can easily attain FX rate convergence, right? So we need to have that kind of system, whereas the operations of the BDCs are easily synced. But you need a system in place. It will be a technologically driven system, just like you see through the IME windows. You go into banks to see what rates are across different currencies. We need to start probably having that, some form of system for BDCs, whereas we can easily see what the BDs, what the ask price again is. And it gives us a sense of transparency, pricing mechanism also around the BDCs, and a combination of that, I think that's going to work.
All right. I mean, hopefully we see all of this pan out within the markets and a stronger Naira. That's what we want, not just a stable Naira. Thank you so much, Samuel Oyekanmi, Research and Insight Lead at Norrenberger Financial Group.